And welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a great and fantastic morning, weekend, evening, day, whatever it is you are up to. Hope it's been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for showing up to the channel. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video as we get into this. And of course, comment down below with your thoughts and opinions after you have gone through the discussions in this video. There's much to break down. There's much to talk about. We're even going to be looking at situations once again, talking about the different aspects of side decking in Yu-Gi-Oh! This, of course, disclaimer, is just a thought experiment. A little bit of a thinkerino to help our brains exercise themselves so that we can discuss the pros, the cons, the negatives, all sorts of different aspects of the side deck. We're going to be subdividing this into the following categories, so stay with me here as we discuss conceptually what is the purpose of the side deck, what are the usages for it, and then we'll be tying that into the history and origins, how has that changed over the last few years, and of course, we're going to be looking at multiple different situations in which the side deck has allowed players to express their gameplay either in negative or positive ways in a competitive aspect. We'll be tying the TCG into Master Duel here, just to look at this from the perspective of tournaments, how that has shaped the Master Duel competitive landscape, at least in the Challenger Cup realm, and if there is a future for this in Ranked. And finally, of course, we'll be wrapping everything up with a nice little summary, conclusionary thoughts from myself, talking about what I think about this situation. If this sounds like your kind of video, then thank you so much for stopping by. Maybe consider becoming a Patreon or channel member to see more discussion topics like this. Let's jump into the first aspect. What is the purpose of the side deck? Why does it exist? For what reason do we need to side deck? This is one of the most underutilized mechanics in the entire game. Even the most competitive players will sometimes find ways to flub this up and not really have laid out plans into what actually constitutes their side deck plans. Since the very beginning of the game, the side deck has always been 15 cards. It's been cards that you bring in and out into game 2 and 3 that allow you to change up your strategy depending on what the situation calls for. One of the best usages of the side deck, of course, is something as simple as not having good cards for certain matchups. In any competitive metagame, you will be entering a tournament, and in that tournament, you will be analyzing the field based off of your experiences and your projected assumptions of what that metagame is going to look like. If you go to a locals or a regional, you might just simply know most of the best players in your area, what decks they happen to be playing, and then you can side deck accordingly for them. At a tournament level, you'll be have to looking at this more on the macro scale to try and understand fully what the metagame is looking like overall. We're talking continental. We're talking about people from multiple different nations coming together in one tournament. That is a whole different way to analyze the game. But the point here is that you will be making certain meta calls based off of the cards you put in your deck. You might decide that Perulia is really good this form because of just the overabundance of Vanquish Soul, for example. And so the side deck is supposed to come in here in a situation where you get paired up against like 5 Draco Tail players in a row. And suddenly that Perulia just isn't very good into that matchup. They can actually give you 0 draws just by playing Draco Tail naturally, by not even normal something, just playing off of Faimina, Ketus, and Rahus. So this sounds like a good idea, right? It's supposed to alleviate bad matchups and help you out in situations that you weren't necessarily prepared for. Now conversely, one could argue, well, that's your fault. You just made a bad meta call. It is a card game. There's going to be aspects of variance and randomness. You just have to accept the fact that your deck wasn't built for this specific matchup. Cry about it. At least that's what the best of one Master Duelist will tell you. So I guess to wrap this section up very simply, one does kind of just have to ask themselves, is this a good thing? Is best of 3 better than best of 1? Well, some of the positives of this, of course, is that best of 1 can be very high variance. Well, of course, at this point, we have multiple years of data from Master Duel at this point to really sort of analyze this and hit this point home. We only see the best and same players doing consistently well at things like the Duelist Cup, despite the fact that it is a best of 1 format. Now, what I think best of 3 helps alleviate in this aspect is this idea of variance. Sometimes you just sack your opponent with Maxi Full Loss and they don't draw Ash Blossom. You open starter, extender, Nibiru, and that just shuts down their entire deck fully. In a best of 3 situation, yeah, you might actually sack your opponent. They might sack you. But the idea is that over the course of multiple games, those extremes even out. For history and origins, there isn't really much to report on this front. The side deck has pretty much stayed unchanged for the last 20 or so years. It's always just been there as this tool. Now, I think what has changed is the attitude that players have had towards the side deck. I can even remember myself just first starting out 10 years ago in the competitive landscape, where social media was maybe not as popping as it was today, where information wasn't disseminated as quickly and as fast as it is today with things like metafies, spreadsheets, Discord communities, all of these different highly competitive environments encouraging you to think about your deck really in a sort of optimized way and in a way that is like ultra competitive, rather than just this idea where, well, these cards are okay, let me just throw them in. This is a good engine, let me just put this in. So attitudes have certainly gotten more optimized and competitive towards the side deck. You have these things called side patterns now, a term which was definitely not in the common vernacular of the average competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player 10 years ago. Side patterns being essentially, well, versus this matchup, I'm going to take out these 5 cards. If I lose game 1, I bring in these 3 cards. But then in game 3, if I'm made to start, I can bring in these 6 cards, etc, etc. These are the different types of mathematical calculations and ratios that people put into their side decking today that never really were as commonplace 10 years ago. One other fascinating aspect of the side deck that has happened a couple of times throughout this game's history has been smoke screening. Smoke screening is this idea that you bring in an entirely different engine compared to what you were playing in the first game. We saw a very popular version of this recently where a Labyrinth player was actually playing Labyrinth and then side decking into Tenpai. These are very different strategies. Labyrinth wants to go first, Tenpai wants to go second. The side deck is being used here in a way to completely confuse your opponent, put them in a very difficult situation. Now, the problem with this, however, is the fact that, well, if you get it wrong, you're playing Labyrinth going second or Tenpai going first. Historically, we've seen other advantage of this, like for example, a Beast Warrior amalgamation of Bujins and Fire Fist. In 2014, there were people who were playing a Bujin deck. People would then bring in things like Debunk, Graveyard, and Hand Removal. And they would bring in things like Light Imprisoning Mirror to stop Bujin Yamato and the graveyard effects of all the Bujins. But then they would just simply smokescreen into Fire Fist. Fire Fist being an engine that was all fire monsters. So I think to conclude this section, we can say that for all intents and purposes, the side decking has become more important and more integral to the strategies and the usage of competitive players, particularly when you consider the fact that the game has significantly sped up. When a game is just based around turn 1 and turn 2, those important cards that you bring in for game 2 and 3 become really, really decisive. They become game-winning aspects of Yu-Gi-Oh! And game winning is exactly what we're going to talk about. Situation 1. I side deck into a powerful silver bullet. You do not draw an answer. I win the game. This is perhaps the most egregious example of the side deck. How many times have you been in a game where your opponent just brings in something like Dimensional Barrier, 07 to Dimensional Barrier, thank God that thing is gone in the TCG, and you just cannot play your deck. It is just not able to function. They've brought in a Mystic Mine many years ago. They brought in Retaliating Sea. If you're playing a trap deck, they side deck into something like Red Reboot. We have seen through many years of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just how absolutely detrimental it can be to have one of these silver bullets side decked against you in a game. Now, to counter that, one will simply argue, well, the problem with this situation is the floodgates, the silver bullets, the powerful broken cards. If you just simply ban all of these cards, and which you'll notice, most of the ones that I mentioned are in fact banned now, the game becomes significantly healthier and the side deck does what it was intended to do initially, which was to help your strategy and to give you a little bit of a better compensatory angle versus your opponent compared to outright winning the game on the spot. Because it's not really fun or enjoyable to interact with a counter trap, even today. Things like Solemn Judgment have been hit recently. People are now opting to play things like Dragon's Mind. Counter traps that cannot be interacted with, that just simply shut down a card, some sort of clutch important spell, and you just find yourself unable to keep playing. Especially when going second, that it becomes really frustrating. Situation 2. Your powerful side deck card counters my powerful side deck card. They trade. No meaningful gameplay occurred. How many times have you seen duels where people have a specific floodgate? A Malice player brings in Dimensional Fissure, and so you have to think about some sort of removal maybe that is going to actually let you have a chance versus that deck. And that's not even like the worst part of the Malice deck. It's like, you know, they set up the full combo and they have die fight. I mean, that is... yikes. So the point here with this situation is cards that essentially just fully trade with themselves don't really seem to give much meaningful gameplay. You've brought in Duel and Lockbird that immediately is supposed to shut down the game, but I've drawn the one-off Call by the Grave or Cross Out, and that manages to counter that counter. And so now we've essentially just lost 2 cards and we are just continuing to play the game. Now, I don't think this is a very compelling argument or situation to really think about. At the end of the day, cards do trade with other cards. I suppose maybe the problem here is just how high octane these cards are. If a draw resolves versus a certain deck, that might just be the end of the duel. If a red reboot resolves a certain deck, it's very likely the end of the duel. So while a card is trading with another card, I guess maybe the thing to take into consideration here is the fact that, well, it's a massively powerful game-swinging card, which causes so much high variance to occur in games. 6-7, 6-7. And I suppose the main thing is that this ties back into what we said before. It's the blowouts, the silver bullets, those absolutely crazy, broken, egregious floodgates that get sided in. People bringing in Spell Canceller, people bringing in Retaliating Sea. This is really the main problem. It's not so much that the cards aren't being drawn or are drawn, it's just that the cards that do get drawn are so high value, so pivotal, that they create frustrating experiences. Situation 3. I have a really bad matchup against your deck. Because of this, I can meaningfully take out unplayable cards for more useful cards. And this right here is the absolute best case scenario. I've got a bunch of Graveyard Hate or Nibiru's in my main deck, and I'm playing against Labyrinth. Well, it means that I can bring in something that's just a little better for this matchup. Fuwa Loss might not be amazing, but at least it has some usages compared to Nibiru. I might even be side decking Ash Blossom instead of main decking, although to be fair, everyone is maining that from Ultra Army Fuwa Loss, but for the most part, you can see that there are different cards that you can bring in that are very sort of blanket and open-ended, like the Ghost Sisters, and they sort of help depending on what deck you're playing against, but they help. They don't outright win games. And so, how does this affect us Master Duel players? Well, for those of you who are in tune with the Master Duel competitive landscape, one of the biggest sort of tournament circuit series that happen are the official Konami Challenger Cups. These are tournaments that are hosted 2 or 3 times a week over the course of the weekends, and they have been going on for every week for like a couple of years now at this point. They're very competitive, and the rules have changed in different ways over the last couple of months. We've seen some tournaments that only require best of 1. We've seen some that require 2 deck lists. So not a side deck, but a deck list that is locked in where you can only play a going first and play a going second deck list. This is really interesting, but I suppose it might be worth tying into this to maybe talk about. What would you consider locked deck list to be like for a tournament setting? So there was an event in Master Duel kind of recently where you basically had a designed deck for going first. If you won the coin flip, it would queue you with this deck. But if you lost the dice roll, you would be given your secondary deck. And of course, you prepared and built all of these in advance. So for example, going first, I could play this like crazy spiral wombo combo deck. Going second, I might play some sort of like board breaker sword soul deck with lightning storms and stuff like that. This idea that there are locked deck lists, depending on if you go first or second, sounds kind of interesting conceptually, but I suppose that goes back to one of the situations we discussed, and that is just silver bullets and blowouts. If you can guarantee that you're going first, you just bring in the absolute biggest war crime that you can commit and just hope your opponent doesn't draw enough hand traps. Similarly, for going second, well, it's just board breaker hell. Or you play like 25 hand traps to the point where your opponent can't play. It just creates these like weird environments where neither player can really do anything. Let's discuss best of 2. Best of 2 is this idea that both players get to play the game going first and going second. There is no third decider game. Those of you who are observant may recall that this is something that's very popular in Disney Lorcana, although I think they might have scrapped it semi-recently. It was sort of how you played Lorcana for years. So you'd roll a dice and you'd go first, and then you would get to go first, and then after that game you would have to go second irrespective of the outcome of game 1. Both players get a chance at going first. There's no side decking, there's no bringing in the other cards, and there's no changing up the deck list. You just play your deck, but you get to go first and you get to go second. I'd be very curious to understand really why, from a competitive aspect, why they decided to scrap this, because I think it is interesting, but there's no way Yu-Gi-Oh would ever adopt something like this, especially from another game. Best of 1 or best of 3, well, I suppose this sort of discussion just kind of boils down to the type of person you are. Do you have 7 hours to spare once a week to just go on a weekend to your local card shop and play an entire tournament from beginning to end? Best of 3 definitely sounds very reasonable for you. Do you only have a couple of hours per night or even per week to spare playing Yu-Gi-Oh? Best of 1 definitely sounds more fulfilling because you could just simply get more games out that way. Depending on if you're a casual player, a competitive player, I think there's valid arguments for all aspects. But the most important thing to take away from is really, hot take here, right? Like, never been said before, but if you ban all the floodgates and all the crazy broken, like, silver bullets and stuff like that, well, maybe the side deck is completely fine and there's no issue. And in fact, it's actually a really interesting, good part of the game that allows you to use your deck building ingenuity to come up with strategies for certain matchups, for going first, for going second, provided, of course, that you don't just come up with some crazy, dumb strategy that just instantly wins the game. I hope you enjoyed this little discussion video. Let me know what your thoughts are and your experiences have been with the side deck, and leave a comment down below and let me know. Thanks so much for tuning into this video. I hope you have a great and fantastic day, and until next time, adios.